The consulting industry is being rebuilt in real time. New models are emerging, old assumptions are collapsing, and leaders everywhere are thinking how strategy work should get done differently. Welcome to Alt Consulting Conversations. This series brings together the people who are shaping this transformation. My guest today is someone who has spent 2 decades helping organizations understand customers, unlock growth, and navigate disruption. My guest today is Pontus Sirén, who has worked with organizations across Europe, Asia, and US on customer centricity and disruptive innovation. His career spans BCG, 9 years as partner at Innosight, and now his own firm, CTIT Consulting. He has worked with organizations going through transformation across multiple industries, including professional services, which gives him this unique vantage point to provide his perspective on disruption that is unfolding in consulting industry today. Pontus, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let me start with a big question. From your vantage point, what is changing in consulting industry today? And within this change and the things that we are seeing unfold, what feels temporary and what feels permanent?
I think there are two things that are happening big picture. There's obviously the technological disruption driven by AI, which we'll dive deeper into in this conversation, I'm sure. But there's also a broader disruption, I think, at almost a nation state level. So my hypothesis is that the Western business model is being disrupted. And by West, I mean the US, Europe, so on and so forth. And of course, AI is part of that disruption. But I don't think we can disentangle the disruption that's happening with AI from the disruption of the Western business model. And when we talk about the consulting industry, we often talk only about Western consulting companies. I just looked at who are the top 10 biggest or most prestigious consulting companies in the world, and they're all Western, mostly American or European. And when we think about the fact that in 2000, China had 6% of the world's industrial production, and by 2030, it's estimated that they'll have 45% of that production. And I'm using now industrial production as a shorthand because we can't discuss all the sectors. But if we take that as a shorthand, we're seeing that China is becoming a massive, massive industrial powerhouse. It has been so for decades and many other countries as well. But again, for shorthand, I'm using China as an example of the disruptive model that's emerging from what we might call the global South or the global East. So when we think about this disruption, I think that is permanent, that is unavoidable. The AI disruption that we're going to dive deeper into is I think permanent and happening, and the disruption of the Western business model I think is also very permanent and happening. And for people who have studied and worked with disruption, know that once it reaches escape velocity, there's no turning back. And of course, the decline is always slow. It was slow for Kodak and many other illustrious companies, but it was inevitable. So I think the Western business model is going to be disrupted, big picture. And I think simultaneously, the business model of Western consulting companies will be disrupted, not so much because they're doing anything wrong themselves or they aren't thinking about these things. It's going to be massively disrupted, I think, because their clients are going to be disrupted.
Wow, I think that's a mega trend that you have referred to, and there's a lot to unpack there. So let me actually go to clients and sort of look it from their lens, because as this disruption unfolds almost at a country level, and they are going to move the business models from a client's standpoint. When they look at advisors today, and specifically donning the hat of jobs to be done, because you have been a jobs to be done practitioner, what are clients really trying to get done today by hiring advisors, and how is that changing if you look at last few decades?
I think clients are trying to get the same thing done as they've always tried to get done. They want to have a good answer to difficult problems. Sometimes they know what the good answer is, but they need conviction and political capital to internally make it happen. Sometimes they need an internal or kind of an external expert who is supposedly, impartial and so on. So I don't think the jobs to be done have changed that much. I think, and I don't think they will, in fact. I think there's always going to be advisors. Since time immemorials, kings and noblemen and others have had advisors, and I think advisors will be around as long as humans are around. But I think what's increasingly happening is that of course ultimately people want good solutions, companies want good solutions to a problem. And I think AI is now being incorporated into those solutions at the source. So I was just reading that Leuven in Belgium is testing these Chinese autonomous buses. And they're doing, testing and safety trials right now. And those buses have a tremendous amount of AI incorporated into them because all the cameras and safety and 15 other things that I can't even imagine. And so the city of Leuven wants these autonomous mini buses to run around the city. And they want to do it safely and efficiently and so on and so forth. And so clearly that those jobs to be done are pretty obvious. But the solution, isn't now to have consultants run around and think about safety in Leuven. It's to take a Chinese bus that's been tested in China and plunk it in Leuven, and now they're running around in Leuven. So I think the jobs to be done are eternal in many ways. But I think in the context of this AI discussion, AI is being incorporated in at the source. When I say source, I mean, China and all the testing they've done there. So that's just another example of this question that, 20 years ago, if someone said, we're going to be buying Chinese robot taxis for Belgium, people would have said, you're dreaming. And here we are.
Yeah. So if we look at this point, that you mentioned, the jobs are still the same. People have been hiring advisors and they'll keep on hiring advisors. And we have discussed often that jobs are almost always constant. But then there is a bigger problem which comes of how then customers pick up different solutions. And that's where, the firm that you have, CTIT, which stands for Customers Think in Trade-offs, becomes a very important point, because now with all these choices that are in front of the clients, how would they select the right service providers, what new trade-offs they are willing to make or not willing to make, where they'll hesitate, where they'll take the leap forward. So for the benefit of everyone, would be great if you could just explain the concept of how customers think in trade-off and how we apply the same trade-off lens when it comes to consulting industry, when particularly chief strategy officers or chief innovation officers are evaluating traditional consulting services versus emerging and new consulting service providers.
Sure. So the concept of trade-offs is really a simple one. Every trade-off simply mean what a product or service does and does not do. Its price, features, functionality, quality, and 15 other things that of course depend on the product or service we're talking about. And ultimately, customers have different preferences. They have different priorities. Someone might prioritize quality. Some other might prioritize safety or speed of delivery or whatever. And based on their priorities and their circumstances and what kind of problem they're trying to solve, they'll choose a different package of trade-offs. I think that's quite obvious and intuitive. Now, when we think about trade-offs and buying consulting services, I think one of the challenges with this new world, this AI world that we're increasingly living in, is that there's a kind of a contradiction because everyone more or less has access to similar AI tools. I mean, of course, on a nation state level, we can have debates, but in the business world, we could argue that most companies and organizations increasingly have access to similar tools. Arguably, smaller companies have an advantage because they have access to similar tools as large companies. And so it's very difficult from a client perspective to then say, well, if everyone is using AI or everyone has access to AI, who then uses AI the best? Like, how do you differentiate that? Because most people don't understand. And in the business setting, it's very difficult to distinguish who is the best, leverager of AI. And if I'd gone with a different company that also uses AI, would I have gotten a better solution, or would they have offered more insights? So I think one thing is that there's this dilemma that everyone recognizes that AI is similar and people have access to similar tools, but it's at the same time very difficult to distinguish what are the trade-offs with all these companies that are offering AI. So essentially, I think a lot of companies just choose the same providers as they have so far because they assume everyone has AI and is doing more or less the same thing with AI. Now, that's probably not true, but how does a person who's not an expert distinguish between two consulting companies who use similar AI tools? You detailed in your book, I thought very, very eloquently and very well, all the different systems that some of the leading AI companies are using. But if you then ask me, is Bain's tool better than BCG's or McKinsey, I would have no idea. So probably people at this point are still defaulting to their traditional choices because they can't distinguish the trade-offs between this, that, and the other tool. And until they can, I don't think, at least in the West, the competition is going to change. I think the difference with the China challenge is that their AI is incorporated in the industrial production. So people are getting the benefits of the AI because of quality control, because of price, because of efficiency, but you have no idea what AI tool they use. I was just reading about a China telco AI tool that they were using to inspect for mistakes in woven fabric. And they were eliminating, the machine was then tightening the strings to make sure that the fabric was perfect. So, I mean, China Telecom now using AI to improve fabric production. So my point is again this, that in the West, I think it's very difficult when we talk about the consulting industry because we're so Western centric, and we kind of forget that there's this enormous powerhouse, and of course it's been going on for decades, but it's prime time now. That's producing 32 million cars every year at a price which most Western companies, US or Europe, can't match. Anyway, so I keep coming back to this big picture because I think when we talk about the West, I don't think the McKinseys and the BCGs and Bains are going to go anywhere for anytime soon. But I think as this economic power shifts and the company shifts and the profits shift, just one more point on that. I was looking at how many offices does McKinsey have in China, not counting Hong Kong, 5. How many do they have in Australia that has, 25 million people? 5. So what does that tell us? There are going to be a lot of consulting companies we've never heard of that are going to be the AI powerhouses in 10 years. That's my hypothesis.
And I think, just to relate this entire example to the consulting industry, when you talk about or when you share examples of integrating AI at the source in the product, I think the point that you're sort of hinting at is AI integrated at the source in your business model? Like it's not just an overlay where you're just talking about, hey, we are also using this AI tool and our consultants are 30% more efficient. It's not about that. It's about how you think about a new business model, and how clients or sophisticated clients will start perceiving that differently. So, and any sort of points on that, on when you apply this integration of AI at the source to the business model of consulting, and maybe some new types of consulting models which we have never even heard of coming in the market. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the challenge for traditional consulting companies is that they want to sell big projects, which means lots of people and lots of time, preferably decades if they could choose. But and so they will, in some ways, this I don't want this temptation of inefficiency is built in, as we saw in the context of the law firm where we worked together on that project in Australia. There is a temptation to inefficiency because of the way billings happen and compensation happens and reviews happen and all that. And so of course all these big consulting companies are going to use AI in their model, and they're going to say we have the greatest and latest. But the real challenges, as we saw in that law firm, have to do with motivation, reviews, compensation, and so on, which are much more difficult than spending, $50 million on AI tools and training. And then the companies that don't have that temptation for inefficiency are at an advantage. but that takes a long time to play out. But I think unless you deal with this temptation of inefficiency, it's very predictable what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great segue to the work that we did together with the law firm. And if I just take learnings from that particular project, and this was pre-pandemic, so the AI wasn't there, the pandemic related changes were not there, and we are still talking about how it'll take 4 to 5 years for you to move the needle, and a lot of things after that accelerated because of the circumstances which the world was in and the company was in. Now, if I apply it to consulting, in the book also, there are a couple of examples which I have shared that even though you come with a great tool which has 100 years of your strategy and innovation knowledge built in, you are selling that to customers and saying, hang on, we are also having a great tool in house. But if a customer flips and says, thank you, can you provide that as a service to me? I would be happy to use a tool rather than your consulting team. That, again, from a motivation standpoint, is a very, very tough question for a consulting firm to answer because till now they are still selling the pyramid model. And if the client asks for a product instead of consultants, there's a lot of motivational asymmetry there. So if you sort of take the learnings of whatever we saw in the legal tech industry and the different kind of startups which are coming up there, what do you think might happen with the large incumbent organizations who, uh, frankly speaking, they're doing a lot of work, a lot of great work in coming out with these tools. So it's not that classic disruption of they're sleeping and somebody else is taking over their market. They're actively and aggressively working in that space. But what would be the future trajectory if they don't solve the basic questions on or important questions on inefficiency which resides in the business model?
Well, I think there are a lot of similarities. You can start from what type of people consulting companies hire. I think in the future they'll have to be more technologically savvy as they do in law. I think they have to think very differently about how to structure projects and what outcomes look like. Uh, and arguably they have to be they have to step change how technologically savvy the entire organization is. I mean, you could start to debate that in certain industries they almost have to become IT engineering experts. And when you think, I was looking at, what share of McKinsey's and BCG's profits or revenues at least comes from the industrial practice. It's a very substantial part. And in that business, how are you going to advise unless you have very, very deep AI and engineering and integration skills? At which point are you, what kind of a company are you then? And then the fact that China Telco is selling, kind of consulting services for textile companies starts to make sense. And I think that is a big jump because it's not only about the business model, then it's about education, training, universities, where you hire, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I don't think those models are going anywhere anytime soon. I think they're going to be around for a long time. But I think it's a declining trend, and then within that trend there'll be ups and downs. But I think the trajectory, and I guess, and again, I say the driving force is this shift in competitive dynamics globally. But even then, I don't think the traditional management consulting model is going to be that successful in the longer term. I think Accenture of the Western companies is probably the kind of the model of companies that are best positioned to compete.
Yeah, no, there are a couple of conversations I've had where the name of Accenture comes up, Accenture, IBMs of the world, where they have deep tech muscle and they also have a significant share of doing IT services for clients, where this is a normal, the next logical step for them to move on. And if I may extend your analogy of the Chinese telco, if manufacturing companies start integrating a layer of advisory on top of their machines, it's the same thing which a tech company could do. So Accenture or IBM or Infosys, TCS, other IT consulting companies of the world, all the IT systems that they run, if that has a layer of advisory on top of it, which is now powered by AI, it's a very powerful combination where then you don't need an outside advisory firm to walk in and do the diagnostic and tell you what to do. The tool itself can start telling, what are the gaps and issues that need to be looked at. So that's a very interesting insight. I never thought of that as a sort of an archetype which can come and challenge.
I think that's right. And when I look back at my consulting career, which started in '96, I mean, some of the stuff we did in the mid late '90s is so silly simple by today's standards. And I don't think, as this world progresses and all these changes happen with technology and AI and everything else, I think a lot of that is just not going to be something that you can charge for. Right, because I mean the insights, even with the law firm, and even this discussion we're having, it's not a secret what's going to happen. We can debate the timelines, we can debate about who's going to win or lose, whatever. All of those are relevant debates, but the direction is clear. Then the question is, what are you going to do about it? And then you get into the technology discussion, but it's not really a strategy discussion. So I think for that reason, a lot of these things that companies built their foundation on, at least BCG did originally, is not going to be chargeable work. And anyway, even today we see that they're not making that much money off strategy. It's all implementation and reorgs and what have you. But again, I think the question is you cannot divorce the consulting discussion from this broader competitive discussion and the disruption of the Western model. And the question is, how successful are you going to be if your clients are not successful?
Got it.
And for reasons that have nothing to do with the consultants as such.
No, no, absolutely. So we've spoken about traditional consulting firms. Now there are a lot of new type of consulting firms where they are solo consultants. There is a small partnership with AI powered operating system. Then there are companies which are selling strategy as a product, claiming to be, a superior alternative to hiring consulting firms in certain respects. Then you have all these expert network platforms who can, generate a script on the fly and give you synthesis of insights. So there are a lot of different archetypes which are emerging. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the traditional consulting model has been built with years and decades of deep experience and relationship with clients. So what do you think is the biggest challenge with all the up and coming consulting firms which are trying to figure out a new way to offer advisory services? And how could they overcome that?
In my mind, the biggest challenge is that there is no common measuring stick or common criteria around what they're actually buying or selling. So it's so hyper non-standardized. It's so diverse. Quality, capabilities, who's a good match to fix this problem or to help me with that problem or whatever. I mean, if you look at BCG and McKinsey's and the others, in some ways they created a standard. You'll get great service, you'll get very good analytical abilities, you'll get very smart people. And that kind of people can kind of understand what that is. They know that BCG has partners and this and that, and they have good quality control and what have you. Okay, so people understand what they're buying. And of course, people have relationships and all that. So clients understand what they're buying. They're buying reputation, they're buying political cover for whatever decision they decide to make, so on and so forth. Now, with this new world, it's like people are buying cars, but they don't know what trade-offs they're making. I think maybe the fundamental problem is they don't understand what trade-offs are embedded in each one of those small or medium-sized or whatever size companies we're talking about that are now combining AI. So what's my trade-off? And if you don't understand the trade-offs, you're paralyzed. You can't engage them. So a big part of this is educating clients or potential clients about what are the trade-offs that that you take on if you engage with a company that's not established like a BCG or McKinsey, and that's difficult to do because how do you start to explain the trade-offs? Like there's a myriad of them, and which ones are more important, and some are not important at all, et cetera, et cetera. And I think when people don't understand the trade-offs, they can't make decisions and they default to the traditional options because they understand them, not because the traditional options are necessarily better. it's only when companies can be clear about what the trade-off package is and what the trade-offs entail that people and companies can actually engage with them. And that, of course, is a long education process, as we all know, and it's not easy to explain that to companies because often these smaller companies don't even themselves know exactly what trade-off package they should be offering or promoting.
That's so well put because a lot of conversations I have been having for the past 2 years, there's a trade-off that I'm trying to manage where you on one hand say that there is a much more efficient way to doing things and you don't need an army of junior consultants to get this output done. I can get it done for you faster, better, efficient at the same quality. But at the same time, there's a perception which has been there for decades that if the price is low, it might not be as high quality as you have been used to buying. So it takes a lot of effort for clients to first test it out and see whether this is something which works for them, and then they sort of on their own understand the trade-off that they are making so that they can carry on with that relationship. Otherwise, it's such a product, it's such a service that you're hiring, which is no clear goals and bounds around what would come, what means by I make a comprehensive slide deck versus I'll do a digital strategy for you and I've done it 5 times over. There's so many permutations and combinations. It's very difficult for people to process, and that makes the whole buying decision very tough for clients.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Great. So, on the last point I had, so you have read the book, and thanks for sort of going over it and providing valuable feedback. What ideas from the book resonated most with you?
It was a very interesting read, and it covered a very broad spectrum of topics. I thought what I liked. There were many pieces that I found very interesting, but what kind of stuck to me was when you were doing the section on how companies are responding, the big consulting companies are responding to the threat or the opportunity of AI, and what are the different options that they're pursuing. And you had those charts where you laid out, how different companies are doing that. And what stuck to me was the word evolve. Most of these big companies are trying to evolve with the technology, which makes a ton of sense. And in their shoes, I'd probably be doing the same thing. But as you look at it, I think the evolution will prolong and will maintain and will enable them to, have a good business for many years to come. But I don't think evolve is the answer ultimately. It's not the 20-year answer. It might be the 5-year answer or even the 10-year answer, but I think it's not the 20-year answer. And maybe they'll do something, more radical later on. These are very, very smart people after all. But I thought that was a good summary of the response of the established kind of consulting, companies is evolve. Try to evolve. But I think evolution in the face of disruption rarely works because you get stuck with the old structures and then you start to plug on. Reminds me of that example in Clayton's book about those wire powered excavators who then tried to combine the wires with hydraulics. They kind of created that Frankenstein monster. And I'm not saying there aren't examples of where evolution works, but I think in the face of this kind of epoch changing, you could argue, historically unique, like akin to the Industrial Revolution type disruption, I just don't think evolution is the answer.
Yeah, no, I think that entire section, the key takeaway for me on that was it's great that they are all evolving because initially when the AI tools came, they were all protecting their business, trying to talk about it's hallucinating, it's not right, it's not ready for prime time, the sources are all over the place, it's fabricating data, it doesn't replace the knowledge and the years of experience that we have, but it's what 2.5, 3 years down the line, they are all using it aggressively, but the big question on whether that will be the new normal or would there be some new companies like the Chinese telco trying to just take away consulting work altogether because now it's inbuilt and a feature in their product. So that's That's what we need to look at. But this was a terrific conversation as usual, and your perspectives on trade-offs, customer centricity, and integration of AI at core is something which at least I take away from this discussion. Thank you for joining me today in Alt Consulting Conversations. I look forward to having such dialogues and exploring how these ideas shape in practice.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.